Hey guys, welcome back from Christmas break. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today, but I hope you had a great break, and I'm sure we'll all be together again soon. So today we are going to start a new story called Another Place, Another Time. And just like normal, we're going to start with a little bit of vocabulary. Like last time, for each word, I'm going to give you a visual image, so a picture, some antonyms, meaning opposites of our vocabulary word, and a couple of sentences for context so that they can help you get a feeling for the vocabulary word. Our first vocab word is eloquence. So here's a picture of a guy being applauded for his eloquence. Take a look at those microphones. What's he been doing here? Some antonyms of eloquence are speechless, mumbling, inarticulate. Those are opposites, they're antonyms of eloquence. Early humans didn't have many words in their language, so they lacked eloquence. Figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Lincoln used their eloquence to give great speeches. So let's think about what the word eloquence means. What does it take to give a great speech? Well, you have to be able to speak well. So being eloquent is being well-spoken, good with words. Here's a picture of our second vocabulary word, maroon. This guy has been marooned. Look for a minute. What's around him? How do you think he feels? Some antonyms of maroon are rescue, save, help. Astronauts walk on the moon in pairs so that they don't maroon one. You should never maroon someone on an island with no food or water. So what's it mean to maroon somebody? Now you have definitions in your text. You're certainly welcome to look as we read the story. Here's a girl being judicious. Look at her choosing between that apple and that stack of donuts. She's being judicious. Some antonyms of judicious are foolish, ill-advised, unreasonable. A good leader should be judicious and not jump to conclusions. When you don't have much money, you need to be judicious about how you spend it. Now, I'd like us to look at one more thing. Judicious sounds an awful lot like judicial. And the judicial system is where someone judges. So being judicious is using good judgment. Now here's our story, Another Place, Another Time. And it's a short story by Cory Doctorow. Please pause the video here so everybody can take a minute and pull up their own copy of the story and read along. Here's our story, Another Place, Another Time, by Cory Doctorow. Background. When Cory Doctorow, born 1971, first saw the movie Star Wars at the age of 6, he was inspired to rewrite the entire story as a self-made book. The movie sparked his desire to be a science fiction writer. Publishing his first story at 17, Doctorow has since produced many science fiction novels, short stories, and magazine articles. The author has an online presence as a blogger and makes most of his books available online for free. Gilbert hated time. What a tyrant it was. The hours that crawled by when his father was at sea, the seconds that whipped past when he was playing a brilliant game in the garden with the Limburger children, the eternity it took for summer to arrive at the beach at the bottom of the cliffs, the flashing instant before the winter stole over them again and father took to the sea once more. "You can't hate time," Emmy said. The oldest of the 3 Limburgers and the only girl, she was used to talking younger boys out of their foolishness. It's just time. Gilbert stopped pacing the treehouse floor and pointed a finger at her. That's where you're wrong. He thumped the book he'd taken out of his father's bookcase. A book fetched home from London, heavy and well-made and swollen with the damp air of the sea crossing home to America. He hadn't read the book, but his tutor, Sour Senor Uriarte, had explained it to him the day before while he was penned up inside, watching summer whiz past the study's windows. Time isn't just time. Time is also space. It's also a dimension. Gilbert thumped the book again for emphasis, then opened it to the page he'd marked with a wide blade of sawgrass. See this? This is a point. That's one dimension. It doesn't have length or depth. It's just a dot. When you add another dimension, you get lines. He pointed at the next diagram with a chewed and dirty fingernail. You can go back and you can go forward. You can move around on the surface, as though the world were a page. But you can't go up and down, not until you add another dimension. He pointed to the diagram of the cube, stabbing at it so hard his finger dented the page. That's 3 dimensions, up and down, side to side, and in and out. Emmy rolled her eyes with the eloquence of a 13-year-old girl whose tutor had already explained all this to her. Gilbert smiled. Em would always be a year older than he was, but that didn't mean he would always be dumber than she was. And Mr. Einstein, who is the smartest man in the whole history of the world, he has proved, absolutely proved, that time is just another dimension, just like space. Time is what happens when you can go up and down, side to side, in and out, and before and after. Em opened her mouth and closed it. Her twin brothers, Erwin and Niels, snickered at the sight of their sister struck dumb. She glared at them, then at Gilbert. That's stupid, she said. You're calling Einstein stupid? Of course not, but you must not understand him properly. Space is space, time is time. Everyone knows that. Gilbert pretended he hadn't heard her. But here's the part no one knows. Why can we move through space in any direction? You can't go up, Em said quickly. You got up into my treehouse, he said, putting a small emphasis on my. And you could go back down, too. Emmy, who was a better fighter than any of them, put her fists on her hips and mimed, "Make me." He pretended he didn't see it. Why can we move through space in almost any direction, but time only goes in one direction at one speed? Why can't we go faster, slower, backwards? Sideways, Niels said. He didn't speak often, but when he did, what he said was usually surprising. What's sideways in time? His twin asked. Niels shrugged. Sideways is sideways. This is dumb, Emmy declared, but Gilbert could see that she was getting into the spirit of the thing, starting to understand how it had made him all so angry. Outside Gilbert's house, the summer roared past like a three-masted schooner before a gale, with all sails bellied out. Inside the study, the hours crawled by. And then, in between, there were the breakfasts and dinners with Gilbert's father, who was home for the summer, whose kind eyes were set into an ever-growing net of wrinkles and bags, who returned from his winter voyages each year a little thinner, a little more frail. And what did you learn today, my boy? He said, as he tucked into the mountain of lentils and beans made by the housekeeper, Mrs. Curie, who was so old that she had actually once served as father's nanny and changed his diapers, which always made Gilbert giggle when he thought of it. Father was a strict vegetarian and swore by his diet's life-enhancing properties, though that didn't seem to stop him from growing older and older and older. Gilbert stopped fussing with his lentils, which he didn't like very much. Geography, he said, looking at his plate. We're doing the lowlands. He looked out at the sunset, the sun racing for the other side of the planet, dragging them all back toward the winter. Belgium. Belgium, Belgium, Belgium. His father laughed and smacked his hands on his thighs. Belgium! Poor lad, I've been marooned there once or twice. Land of bankers and cheesemakers. Like hitting your head, Belgium, because it feels so good when you stop. What else? I want to do more physics, but Senor says I don't have the math for it. His father nodded judiciously. He would know. Why physics? Time, he said, simply. They talked of time all summer, in those few hours when Gilbert wasn't with his tutor and when father wasn't sitting at his desk working at his accounts, or riding into town to huddle over the telephone, casting his will over place and time, trying to keep his ships and their cargoes in proper and correct motion. "Why time? You're 11, son. You've got lots of time. You can worry about time when you're an old man." Gilbert pretended he hadn't heard. "I was thinking of more ways that time is like space. If I was at sea, standing on the deck of a ship, I could see a certain ways before me, and if I turned around, I could see a small ways behind me. But the horizon cuts off the view in both directions. Time is like that. I can think back a certain ways, and the further back I try to remember, the fuzzier it gets, until I can't see at all. And I can see forward. We'll have cobbler soon, go to bed, wake tomorrow, but no further." His father raised his furry eyebrows and smiled a genuine and delighted smile. "Ah, but things separated by time affect each other the way that events separated by space can't. A star dying on the other side of the universe, so far away that its light hasn't yet had time enough to crawl all the way to us, can't have any effect on us. But things that happened hundreds of years ago, like the planting of the seed that grew the oak that made this table." He rattled his saucer on it, making his coffee sway like a rough chop. He waggled his eyebrows again. "Yikes," Gilbert said. That hadn't occurred to him. What if time moved in every direction and at every speed? Could you have a space where events at the far end of the galaxy affected us? He answered his own question. Of course, because the events could travel backwards in time, or He fumbled, remembered Niels. Sideways. He swallowed. "What's sideways in time?" He shrugged. "Sideways is sideways," he said. His father laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks, and Gilbert didn't have the heart to tell him that the phrase had been Niels's, because making his father laugh like that was Christmas and his birthday and a day at the beach all rolled into one. And then his father took him down to the ocean, down the rough goat trail cut into the cliff, as sure-footed as a goat himself. They watched the sun disappear behind the waves, and then they moved among the tide pools, swirling their hands in the warm, salty water to make the bioluminescent speck-sized organisms light up like fireworks. They sat out and watched the moon and the stars, lying on their backs in the sand, Gilbert's head in the crook of his father's arm, and he closed his eyes and let his father tell him stories about the sea and the places he went in the long, lonely winters, while the waves went shh, shh, like the whisper of the mother who died giving birth to him. Then they picked their way back up the cliff by moonlight that was so bright it might have been day, a blue-white noon in shades of gray, and his father tucked him up into bed as if he were 3 years old, smoothing the covers and kissing him on the forehead with a whiskery kiss. As he lay along a moment that stretched sleepily out, like warm taffy, suspended on the edge of sleep, the thought occurred to him. What if space moved in only one direction, in 2 dimensions, like time? The year passed. For so long as Gilbert could remember, Summer's first messenger had been the postmaster, Mr. Ossinger, who rode his bicycle along the sea road to the house to deliver his father's telegram advising of his expected arrival in port and the preparations to be made for him. Mrs. Curie usually signed for the letter, then knocked on the sturdy door to deliver it into Gilbert's eager hands. But this year, while the wind and rain howled outside the window, and Senor Uriarte plodded through the formation of igneous rock, Mrs. Curie did not come and deliver the letter, rescuing him from geography. She didn't come to the door, though Senor had finished rocks and moved on to algebra, and then to Shakespeare. Finally, the school day ended. Gilbert left Senor stirring through the coals of the study fire, adding logs against the unseasonal winds outside. Gilbert floated downstairs to the kitchen as though trapped in a dream that compelled him to seek out the housekeeper, even though some premonition told him to hide away in his room for as long as possible. From behind, she seemed normal, her thin shoulders working as she beat at the batter for the night's cake, cranking the mixer's handle with slow, practiced turns. But when the door clicked shut behind him, she stopped working the beater, though her shoulders kept working, shuddering, rising, falling. She turned her face to him, and he let out a cry and took a step back toward the door. It was as though she had been caught by an onrush of time, one that had aged her, turning her from an old woman to an animated corpse. Every wrinkle seemed to have sunk deeper. Her fine floss hair hung limp across her forehead. Her eyes were red and leaked steady rills of tears. She took a step toward him, and he wanted to turn and run, but now he was frozen. So he stood, rooted to the spot, while she came and took him up in her frail arms and clutched to him, sobbing dry, raspy sobs. "He's not coming home," she whispered into his ear, the whiskers on her chin tickling at him. "He's not coming home, Gilbert. Oh, oh, oh." He held her and patted her, and the time around him seemed to crawl by, slow enough that he could visualize every sweet moment he'd had with his father, time enough to visualize every storm his father had ever narrated to him. Had all that time and more, before Signor Uriarte came downstairs for his tea and found them in the kitchen. He gathered up frozen Gilbert and carried him to his bedroom, removed his shoes, and sat with him for hours, until he finally slept. When morning dawned, the storm had lifted. Gilbert went to his window to see the stupid blue sky with its awful yellow sun, and realized that his father was now gone forever and ever, to the end of time. Today, please go through the rest of your directions in Google Classroom. Do your best. I'll see you as soon as I can, and we'll continue our story tomorrow.